Desmond had pruned the same hedges for nearly 2 years without being noticed. At 8:52 a.m., that changed, because inside, the multi-million-dollar deal of Carlton Stewart's career was about to fall apart, and the translator was missing. Carlton Stewart was one of the most influential men in Jamaica, charismatic, calculating, and the billionaire CEO of Best Buy Automobiles, the Caribbean's leading vehicle importer. Like most mornings in his world, everything seemed under control. Power bowed to his will. Time obeyed until, without warning, it did not. It was 8:27 a.m. In the sleek, glass-walled conference room of the Jamaica Pegasus Hotel, a group of sharply dressed Japanese investors sat waiting patiently. Their black folders were lined up with mathematical precision, and one of them glanced at his watch. The meeting was set for 9 a.m. Carlton's team was in position, polished, prepared, seated across the table with mirrored English and Japanese presentations. Every detail had been flawlessly arranged except one. The translator was missing. On the table was a deal worth $500 million, the biggest of Carlton's career. This was not only an investment, but a partnership proposal that could transform Best Buy Automobile into the Caribbean's first electronic car empire. One mistranslation, one misstep, and everything could collapse. And the translator hadn't shown up. Carlton stepped onto the dew-flecked hotel lawn, the crisp scent of freshly cut grass riding the morning breeze. His polished leather shoes clicked softly against the stone path. Clad in a tailored navy suit, a gold Rolex catching the sun beneath his cuff, he looked every bit the billionaire, but his posture was tight, his brow furrowed, and his grip on the phone was tense as he dialed again. Still no answer. Straight to voicemail. He hissed under his breath and left a message anyway. "Latoya, where the hell are you? The meeting starts in less than half an hour, and you're not here yet. The investors are already waiting. I swear, if I lose this deal, because you overslept." He growled through clenched teeth as he hung up the phone. Just a few steps away, crouched beneath the dappled shade of a tall palm, a man in faded khaki uniform, clipped at the edge of a plant with quiet precision, a pair of hand shears glinting softly in his grip. His presence was unassuming, almost invisible. Just another gardener, tucked into the background of the playground of the rich and powerful. Carlton didn't notice him. Like most people, he never saw the gardener, didn't think to. Carlton, the most astute man in the automobile dealership, couldn't afford a mishap, especially not on a day like today. Inside the hotel's grand conference room, the 3 Japanese businessmen sat in composed silence. Their posture straight, their expressions unreadable, but their expectations were high. They had flown in from Tokyo the night before. Now they waited, patient and precise, as the clock edged toward 9 a.m. These were no ordinary executives. They were old school, traditional, disciplined, and fluent in business, but not in English. Their one non-negotiable condition for the deal was clear from day one. A fluent Japanese interpreter must be present. Without one, the deal would unravel before it even began. Carlton's team sat anxiously. Laptops were open, bilingual presentation decks displayed in both English and Japanese. Bottled water and Blue Mountain coffee were neatly arranged, every detail polished to perfection, at least on the surface. But beneath the calm, a quiet unease began to grow. Their boss hadn't returned yet, an unspoken sign that the translator was still missing. And with each passing minute, time was slipping away quickly. Carlton stared at his phone, as if willing Latoya to call through sheer force of will. Panic and frustration were boiling over. Just then, Michelle, his assistant, stepped outside, her face pale, her eyes uneasy. "Sir, the translator got in an accident on the way here," his assistant stammered. She stepped closer. "Accident?" Carlton turned in surprise. "This is a multi-million-dollar deal, Michelle, and it's impossible to find a Japanese interpreter in Kingston under 10 minutes. "I know, sir," said Michelle, and the investors are already exchanging glances. Carlton paced near the garden, frustration etched into the tight set of his jaw. Nearby, Desmond stooped alone, trimming the edge plants with quiet, deliberate hands. Transparent to the world, overlooked by most, though often ignored, Desmond was content working at the hotel, a renowned establishment praised for its world-class hospitality and respectful treatment of staff. His wages weren't high, but they were steady and always on time. That alone earned his quiet respect. For nearly 2 years, he had tended these grounds. Only a few had ever bothered to learn his name. To many, he was simply deportee. He carried a burden far heavier than the tools he wielded. Years ago, locked behind bars in a foreign land, he had learned languages and patience the hard way. He watched Carlton, desperate and restless, and felt a stirring inside. This was his chance to step beyond the shadows and finally speak. Taking a deep breath, Desmond set down his pruning shears and straightened. The man who had never once met his gaze was about to hear him. "Sir," he said evenly, "if you'd like, I can try to translate for you." Michelle let out a nervous, almost reflexive laugh, sharp and strained. "Wait, a black Jamaican gardener speaking Japanese," she sniggered, as if the idea itself were absurd. Carlton turned, frowning. "You translate Japanese? You're the gardener, right?" "Yes, sir," Desmond replied without flinching. "But I'm also fluent in Japanese." Carlton looked him over, uncertain whether this was a joke, a bluff, or something worse. But before he could answer, the glass door behind them slid open with a soft hiss. One of the Japanese businessmen stepped out, his expression calm but expectant. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, his silver tie perfectly knotted, a leather folder tucked beneath one arm. His face was composed but tight with irritation. "Ra-di-to. Star meeting," he said, stumbling over the words. His accent strong, the impatience in his tone clear despite the struggle. Carlton instinctively opened his mouth to speak, but Desmond stepped forward first and bowed respectfully. Then he spoke, fluently, calmly, confidently, in rapid flowing Japanese. As he spoke, a memory flickered. Professor Navarro, nodding in the half-light of their cell, whispering, "Language is power." The businessman paused, visibly surprised. Then his eyes narrowed with interest. He replied, testing Desmond. Desmond answered back, shifting his tone from formal to collaborative, with the ease of a seasoned interpreter. Carlton could only stare. A moment ago, this man was clipping hedges under the sun. Now he was engaging a multi-million-dollar investor in flawless Japanese. It didn't make sense, and yet it did. What Carlton didn't know, what no one at the Pegasus Hotel could have guessed, was that Desmond Campbell had spent 15 years of his life behind bars in the United States. His cellmate had once been a celebrated linguistics professor, a master of language who slipped from the lecture halls into the shadows, translating for international drug cartels until his brilliance landed him behind bars. In that cell, surrounded by men who spoke in codes and dialects, Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, Mandarin, Hebrew, Arabic, Swahili, Yoruba, Desmond listened. He studied. He learned. For nearly 12 years, the linguist was more than just a cellmate to Desmond. He was a tutor, a guide. For one, teaching languages brought comfort, a distraction from the long sentence. For the other, learning them was a way to escape prison walls without ever leaving. Together they endured confinement, word by word, language by language, each lesson a purposeful way to pass the time. Japanese was one of those languages, and like the others, he didn't just learn it, he mastered it. Not because it was easy, but because it was beautiful, disciplined, exact, like the people who spoke it. Now, As Desmond stood calmly speaking with the investor in fluent Japanese, the tension in the man's shoulders visibly eased. Desmond explained that he had overheard Carlton discussing the missing translator and simply offered to help. The businessman gave a small, respectful nod, then gestured silently toward the hotel. Carlton looked at Michelle. She looked back, speechless. "Who the hell is this guy?" he muttered. And for the first time that morning, Carlton really saw Desmond. Not as the gardener, but as the man who might just save everything. The Japanese businessman glanced at Carlton, then turned to Desmond and said something quickly in Japanese. Without missing a beat, Desmond responded, his tone respectful, his delivery flawless. The words flowed like water, smooth and practiced, as if he had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. Carlton and Michelle watched, their faces shifting almost in unison. The suspicion that had been etched into their features just seconds earlier melted into something else. Surprise, then relief, and finally, faint smiles. Carlton straightened, adjusting the cuff of his suit. "Yes," he said, nodding. "Please, come in and translate for us." Michelle blinked. "You're joking," she said, eyeing Desmond's appearance with quiet disdain. Carlton turned to her, his voice low but firm. "No, I'm not." Desmond nodded once and followed them inside, silent and composed, his heavy work boots echoing softly against the polished marble floor. Inside the conference room, Carlton's team looked up as the group entered, expressions turning from confusion to outright puzzlement as Desmond took the empty chair beside the investors. The Japanese businessman leaned in and quietly explained the situation to his colleagues. They listened, nodded, and summed it up without judgment. They hadn't traveled here for drama. They had come for business. And as for the translator, they cared only that he could deliver. Desmond sat still, the muffled voices inside drifting through the thick glass. His hands gripped tightly, as if still holding the pruning shears. The suited men at the table, investors, executives, treated him like he didn't exist. Just a gardener, a nobody, but inside him, a storm raged. Doubt clawed at him, familiar and sharp. He'd carried it for years. Memories surfaced uninvited, cold prison walls, whispered threats in foreign tongues, the long, brutal hours of silence. He had studied those languages in desperation, reaching for a future beyond iron bars. But now, standing at the edge of that future, a darker question lingered. Was his past a stain too deep to scrub away? He wiped sweat from his brow and glanced at the polished floor, the sleek table. Today wasn't just about translating. It was about transformation. For his grandmother, for the boy who once dreamed big and was crushed by injustice. A deep breath steadied him. No more hiding, no more silence. Desmond exhaled and relaxed, quiet determination settling in his chest like steel. There was a beat of awkward silence, but Carlton offered his team a steady knowing glance, a look that said, "Trust me, we've no other choice." Desmond adjusted his posture, hands resting calmly on the table. The Japanese businessmen acknowledged him with small nods, polite, curious, perhaps even impressed. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a man who didn't belong. But the moment he opened his mouth and began to translate Carlton's opening remarks into fluent Japanese, all doubts began to vanish. Whatever people had thought about Desmond Campbell before, gardener, deportee, invisible, those labels were falling away. Word by word, sentence by sentence, he was becoming something else entirely. Desmond's first words were silk. He translated with razor-sharp precision, his voice smooth and unhurried, steady as a seasoned reggae singer holding court at a grand concert. Not a single stumble, not a moment of hesitation, just pure command, wrapped in the calm confidence of a man who had nothing to prove, and yet was proving everything. The room fell silent as he began to speak, all eyes drawn to the man in the gardener's khaki uniform. now seated beside local businessmen, sharp-suited executives, and foreign investors. Mr. Sato says he appreciates the welcome, Desmond translated evenly, but if there is a problem, he prefers to postpone the meeting. Carlton stared at him, wide-eyed, as if witnessing a genie emerge from a bottle. Moments ago, Desmond was a blur in the background, another figure trimming trees. Now, he held the floor like a diplomat trained in Tokyo. Carlton composed himself. "That won't be necessary," he said quickly, voice regaining its weight. "We're ready to present right now." Desmond gave a crisp nod, then turned and relayed the message in Japanese. His tone subtly shifted to match the gravity of Carlton's words. Carlton had watched silently, wrestling with an unease he couldn't name. Every word Desmond translated cracked something deeper inside him, a long-held assumption he no longer trusted. Mr. Sato listened, his brow lifting ever so slightly. Then he offered a small nod in return, a signal of cautious approval. Around the table, Carlton's team exchanged glances, confused, impressed, unsure what to make of the man who had somehow become the linchpin of the entire meeting. Desmond never flinched. He wasn't just translating, he was orchestrating. But inside, doubt scratched at the back of his mind like rust beneath polished chrome. He could conjugate verbs in 10 languages, but could he convince a boardroom to forget the word deportee? Would they still respect a man whose resume came with mugshots instead of degrees? Still, Desmond was conducting energy, guiding tone, matching pace. He didn't just know the words, he understood the room. And as the meeting began in earnest, it became clear to everyone present. They hadn't just found a translator. They had discovered a force of nature, cloaked in green khaki and dust-covered boots. One of the elder investors, seated at the far end of the table, raised an eyebrow. He leaned forward slightly, replying in a soft but deliberate tone, testing Desmond's ear, probing for cracks. Desmond didn't blink. He answered with equal softness, delivering the reply in Japanese with nuance and precision. Not only did he translate the investor's meaning, but he added context, softened a hint of tension, and without pause, gracefully corrected a minor but critical misprint in the presentation materials. Desmond understood not only the intricacies of the Japanese language, but also the principles of business administration. He made it all look effortless. Carlton sat back, stunned. This wasn't a miracle anymore. It was mastery. From the far end of the room, Desmond was operating at the level of a world-class interpreter, guiding the meeting like a seasoned conductor navigating a symphony through a delicate movement. For a moment, Carlton felt as if he were dreaming. A man in sun-bleached khaki and dust-worn work boots, not a tailored suit and polished shoes, was translating a negotiation that could transform his company into an empire. Beside him, Michelle crossed her arms, eyes narrowed, her stare hardened with every nod of approval, every respectful glance Desmond received from the investors. Compliments passed back and forth in a language she couldn't track, and that unnerved her. In a society still bruised by colorism, she had long taken quiet pride in her lighter skin, believing it made her better. But now, she sat, watching a man in a gardener's uniform, his skin the deep polished hue of ebony, outshining her and every light-skinned colleague in the room. Carlton leaned toward her and whispered, "Did he say that?" Desmond, overhearing, answered before Michelle could respond. "Yes," he said calmly. "He liked the clarity of your proposal, but he suggested a change in the shipping and handling clause." Carlton nodded slowly, absorbing the moment. "You get that?" Desmond gave a small smile. "Yes, I understand." Carlton exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Across the table, Mr. Sato gave a brief approving nod. The meeting was no longer just being saved. It was being transformed. There was something in Carlton's eyes now when he looked at Desmond. Something deeper than appreciation, maybe even respect, The rhythm of the meeting had shifted. What began as a high-stakes, high-risk gamble had transformed into smooth diplomacy. The tension that once gripped the investors slowly dissolved, replaced by calm engagement, then interest, then laughter. They asked questions, they listened, they smiled. And when the meeting finally ended, 2 hours later, the room stood in unison. The investors shook Carlton's hand, each grip firm and deliberate. Desmond offered one final phrase in Japanese, his voice still measured and courteous. Then he turned and translated. "They say they consider you trustworthy." Carlton gave a small smile. "Thanks. I appreciate the compliment." Desmond nodded and relayed the message back before stepping aside. The investors bowed slightly and extended final handshakes before leaving the room, their polished shoes clicking quietly as they exited. The glass doors sighed shut behind them. Silence settled over the room. Carlton stood, staring at Desmond, as if trying to decode something impossible. Then finally, he asked the question that had been building in him since that first flawless sentence on the lawn. "Where did you learn to do that?" Desmond smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Prison," he said simply. The word hit the air like a dropped stone in still water. The room went silent. Carlton's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. For the first time that day, the man known for always having something to say didn't. Behind them, Michelle stood by the window. Her arms were crossed again, but her gaze wasn't confused anymore. It was cold, calculating. A new image of Desmond had already begun forming in her mind. Not the skilled interpreter, not the hero of the morning, but a dark-skinned man with a record. And that was all she needed to know. The next morning, something was different. Desmond arrived early, as always. Same uniform, same dust-worn boots, same quiet rhythm. The rake in his hand made its familiar whisper across the gravel path as he moved beneath the palms. But now, every glance that used to pass through him lingered. Where once he was invisible, today eyes followed him. Some curious, some cautious, a few even respectful. For the first time in over a year, the hotel manager approached him. "Desmond," she said with a smile. Sweet, too sweet. He straightened. "Good morning, Miss Carby." Her tone carried a rehearsed warmth, the kind reserved for VIPs and press releases. "You made quite the impression yesterday," she said. "On behalf of the board, we thank you." Desmond gave a faint smile, not unkind, but knowing. "Thank you, Mom," he said, and returned to raking. She lingered for a moment longer, as if searching for something else to say, then turned and walked away, heels clicking neatly against the tiled walkway. Desmond looked out across the lawn, golden in the morning light, the same breeze rustling through the palm trees as always. But something had shifted, not in the air, not in the grass. In him, sometimes one moment is all it takes to change everything. Surprisingly, Miss Carby called Desmond into her office. "Carlton Stewart is on the phone. He'd like to speak with you," she said, holding out the office phone with a smile that still felt a little too rehearsed. Desmond took the receiver, his fingers steady. "Hello." "Hello." Carlton's voice came through, steady, but tinged with something like respect. "I received an email from the investors. They want you at the next meetings officially." Desmond raised an eyebrow. "What about your team?" he asked cautiously. "What about them?" Carlton replied, a hint of challenge in his tone. Desmond hesitated. "Are they just going to accept me?" "They'll have to," Carlton said flatly, "or they can leave." There was a pause. Then Desmond asked quietly, "Do you trust me, or are you just trying to save your deal?" Carlton was silent for a moment before answering, "Honestly, maybe both." Desmond's voice softened but remained controlled and calm. "I saw something in you yesterday that I couldn't ignore. I'm not only fluent in 10 foreign languages, I also read body language." There was a long pause on the other end. "The moment I said prison, You and your assistant cast negative suspicions. Desmond continued steadily. People go to prison for many reasons. Some are even wrongfully imprisoned. He took a steady, unwavering breath. In a country where racism shaped the justice system, I was convicted of a crime I didn't commit. Spent 15 years in federal prison for simply resembling another black man, a convenient mistake of identity. Silence. Carlton swallowed the weight of those words, the line crackling faintly between them. Carlton spoke quietly, the weight of his words unmistakable. I'm sorry for judging you wrongfully. Desmond exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and resignation in his voice. The irony is, Mr. Sato asked me yesterday, just before he left, how I speak Japanese so well. I told him my story. He listened, really listened. He didn't judge. He felt my pain and showed compassion. Carlton felt a wave of guilt and humiliation wash over him. He had hoped the investors never knew, using an ex-convict as a translator, but they already knew, and clearly, they held no qualms. I'm so sorry, Carlton whispered. Desmond shook his head slowly, steadily, and resolutely. I'll do it, he said, but on one condition. Name it, Carlton replied immediately. I want to be treated with dignity and respect by every member of your team. Carlton took a deep breath, then gave a genuine smile, a promise in his eyes. You have my word. Anyone who fails to show you proper respect will be fired. No exceptions. There was a pause, a shared understanding passing between them, a beginning. Desmond hung up the phone, but the floor beneath his feet felt different now. He no longer walked like a gardener. He walked like a man clutching a lifeline, one that could finally carry him toward his ambition. Monday morning arrived with a new rhythm. It wasn't that Desmond was skipping his old routine of riding his battered bicycle through the city streets. Rather, today, he was chauffeured in a sleek, luxurious car straight to the hotel. Today was different. He stepped through those gleaming glass doors wearing a tailored suit. No longer the gardener's faded uniform heading toward the storehouse, but a professional on a mission to the conference room as the official translator. The marble floor still shone beneath him, but now the ground held weight, a promise of new purpose. He moved through the hotel with quiet confidence. The people who once passed through him without a glance now turned to look. Some smiled, some whispered, others stared with quiet resentment. But no one dared call him deportee anymore. The soft tap of his polished shoes echoed through the corridors, a steady metronome underscoring the subtle shift in the air. By the time he reached the 5th floor, the Japanese investors were already seated for their second round meeting. And this time, Desmond was not just part of the scenery, he was center stage. Carlton greeted the investors with sharp business formality, his tone precise and confident. Yet the moment Desmond stepped into the room, everything shifted. The investors rose simultaneously, smiles blooming across their faces as they bowed deeply in the traditional Japanese gesture of respect. Mr. Desmond, said Mr. Sato warmly, speaking in his native tongue, it's truly a pleasure to see you again. Desmond returned the greeting with quiet grace. His presence settled the room like the gentle flow of a mountain stream, calming, steady, soothing. The meeting began, but Desmond didn't simply translate words. He navigated conversations, adjusted tone with delicate finesse, gently corrected cultural missteps, and bridged complex concepts that no spreadsheet or slideshow could capture. With every subtle intervention, Carlton watched him, something new flickering in his eyes, genuine admiration. Yet not everyone was pleased. Michelle sat rigid, her gaze sharp and locked on a printed contract. That morning, just hours before the meeting, she had quietly inserted a small, vague clause with the help of Latoya, who had escaped the car accident with only minor injuries. At Michelle's urging, Latoya had conspired with her, hoping the favor might earn her job back. The clause granted Best Buy the right to involve a third-party investor. It was the kind of mistranslated Japanese phrase designed to go unnoticed, subtle enough to slip past, costly enough to matter. "Let's see how smart he really is," Michelle whispered to herself, pressing her fingertips into the edge of the paper. Desmond scanned the draft contract handed to him by one of the executives. His brow furrowed as he paused, fingertips tracing a slight line he hadn't noticed in the English version. He looked up, voice steady, yet respectful. "Mr. Sato, there's a significant error in this clause." Then in English, he turned to Carlton, his voice low but firm as he pointed out the discrepancy. Carlton leaned in, his face tightening with concern. "What kind of error?" Desmond pointed delicately. "This wording grants Best Buy Automobile the right to involve a third-party investor, which directly violates the terms you agreed upon verbally. It also contradicts the English version of the contract. Best Buy has no such right." A quiet gasp swept through the room. Carlton straightened, stunned. "You're sure?" "I'm certain," Desmond replied calmly. "If you allow me to fix it now, I can prevent this from becoming a problem." The Japanese investors exchanged quiet whispers, weighing the unfolding revelation. Carlton gave a small, deliberate nod, then turning to the investors, he spoke with honest clarity. He explained the misprint, the original intent behind the clause, and the necessary correction. His tone was sincere, not just assuring them, but earning their trust on a deeper level. When the meeting concluded, Mr. Sato approached Desmond with quiet grace. He bowed respectfully, smiled warmly, and shook Desmond's hand firmly. "I know you don't work for him," Mr. Sato said softly in Japanese, "but things work out because you're here." Desmond smiled in return, bowing politely. "Thank you," he replied. Days later, Michelle's inbox buzzed with the official confirmation. The deal was signed. Best Buy Automobile was now receiving cars directly from one of Japan's top manufacturers of electric vehicles. At the Japanese investor's request, Desmond Campbell was officially hired as Best Buy Electronic Automobile's International Communications Coordinator. Desmond now walked the halls of Best Buy Electronic Automobiles with quiet confidence. No title could measure the humility that grounded him. One Thursday afternoon, precisely at 4:18 p.m., Carlton's voice crackled through the office intercom. "Desmond, can you come to my office for a minute, please?" Desmond stepped inside. Carlton was seated behind his desk, leaning forward as he reviewed a lengthy contract. "The investors are launching a new dealership in Guyana," Carlton said, looking up with a steady gaze. "They want you on site for the first 3 months of meetings." Desmond tilted his head thoughtfully. "You and I will be traveling there?" Carlton shook his head. "No, they want only you there to bridge the language gap and ensure everything runs smoothly. I'll join virtually." Desmond didn't answer immediately. The weight of the moment hung between them. Finally, Carlton stood, his voice sincere. "You made this deal happen, Desmond. You changed this dealership, and you changed me." Desmond held Carlton's gaze and stepped closer. "If I go," he said quietly but firmly, "the company has to hire a professional caregiver for my 85-year-old grandmother. She was the only person who took me in with open arms after I was deported from America 3 years ago. I won't leave her behind without knowing she's properly cared for." Carlton nodded without hesitation. "Of course," he assured him. "I understand. I will make sure she receives the care you would approve of." Desmond turned his eyes toward the large window behind Carlton. The sun streamed in brightly, but the office's cool air conditioning pushed the heat away, an irony that mirrored the storm within him. Outside, a chill gripped him. Inside, a warmth was slowly kindling. "I was an international scholarship student at the University of Alabama," Desmond whispered, his voice low, "just months away from finishing my Master of Business Administration when everything fell apart. I was racially profiled, arrested, wrongfully convicted, imprisoned, and then deported. For the last 18 years, my life has been torment." He paused, swallowing the weight of his truth. People told me I couldn't come back from all that. But now, someone finally, without even knowing it, asked, why not? Carlton smiled warmly. Some people think they know the future, making false prophecies about others. But you've always been bigger than the box they tried to put you in. Desmond nodded, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. Thank you, he said, gesturing toward Carlton. He left the office in silence, but something in his gaze spoke volumes. He wasn't going back. He was moving forward, and those who doubted him would have to catch up. The next morning, Michelle arrived early, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floors with every step, her jaw clenched, eyes burning with a fire she hadn't felt in years. Resistance, frustration, and something darker, irrelevance. Without knocking, she strode straight into Carlton's office. He was seated reviewing documents, his back turned to her. We need to talk, she said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. Carlton didn't look up. If it's about the contract, I know the clause wasn't an accident. The legal teams have already addressed it. Michelle stepped closer, her voice rising. That was a typing error, a mistake. Finally, Carlton turned to face her, his gaze steady and cold. No, it was sabotage. Thankfully, Desmond spotted it and fixed it. The name cut through Michelle like a blade, piercing her with raw enmity. You're blinded by him, she hissed. Can't you see what's happening? You're throwing away years of loyalty for a deported criminal who learned a few languages from fellow inmates. Carlton's voice dropped low, razor sharp. Watch your words. Michelle's hands clenched into fists. He's not one of us. We worked our way through business schools and corporate ladders. He came out of prison with a story. That's not the same. Can't you see how dark he is? That alone sends the wrong message for the company's image, she muttered, the words coated in the kind of bias she didn't even think to hide. No, Carlton replied, quietly but firmly. He's showing us what the world could have been if we hadn't wasted time looking down on people like him. He paused. Speaking of the company's image, he continued, his voice steady. This situation opened my eyes to the color prejudice you've been quietly enforcing in hiring. It made me wonder how many qualified and gifted people had walked through those doors, only to be turned away because their skin was a shade too dark. You act morally upright while practicing colorism, but let's be honest, as light as our skin may be, to the rest of the world, we are just as black as Desmond. Michelle's face contorted with restrained fury. Pride and indignation are wrestling beneath the surface. I'm not black, I'm brown, she snapped, her tone sharp and brittle. Every decision I made was for the good of this company. I hired those individuals because high-color people are the face of most major establishments across the island. That's the reality. Carlton's expression hardened. His voice, though calm, landed like a blow. That's not reality, Michelle. That's the residue of colonialism, of bias dressed up as business sense. He stepped forward, every word deliberate. My beloved late mother founded this company, a dark-skinned woman, not some so-called high-collar poster girl crafted to appease colonial sensibilities. She built Best Buy Automobile with grit, vision, and dignity. She didn't lighten herself to fit in. She made the world adjust to her. He paused, the weight of memory pressed down on him, like heat on skin. If she could see this now, to find someone like you in her company, quietly sustaining the very prejudice she spent her life dismantling. His voice caught for a beat as his eyes drifted to the photo of his mother on the wall. She'd be heartbroken, then softer, steadier, but today she'd also be proud. Proud to see Desmond here, not hidden, not dismissed, but standing exactly where he deserves to be. A heavy silence settled between them. Outside, the wind rustled faintly through the palm trees, indifferent to the storm brewing inside. Michelle's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin, cold line. If he stays, I go, she said. No apology, no emotion. just a sharp edge of entitlement. For a moment, Carlton felt his mother's presence, like the familiar ache she carried whenever people tried to measure worth by skin tone. But in him now, that ache had hardened into something else, resolve. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. Then you know where the door is. Michelle's eyes flared with wounded pride, the fire boiling over. Without another word, she turned sharply and slammed the door behind her. In the silence that followed, Carlton reflected on Michelle's unethical conduct, her blatant attempt at sabotage and discriminatory hiring decisions made in secret, betraying the values he believed they both shared. She betrayed my trust. Moving forward, Best Buy will adopt a zero-tolerance policy against color prejudice, where individuals are evaluated solely on their qualifications and moral character, not the color of their skin. Outside, Desmond stood near the terrace, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the gardener below. The same kind of work he once did, but now he stood as a man who had spoken himself into a very different place. As he reflected on his life's journey, Michelle's heels came clicking down the corridor, sharp, deliberate, her posture stiff, her eyes locked on Desmond like a target. He didn't miss it, the way she looked at him, not curious, not impressed, but cold and calculating. As she approached, Desmond turned slowly, not out of confrontation, out of clarity. His voice was calm, but there was steel behind it. "You've been staring at me like I stole something," he said. "So I'll ask, what is it that offends you so much? The suit, the seat at the table, or the fact that I earned it without your permission?" Michelle narrowed her eyes, her voice low and sharp. "You're bold now, you piece of shit. A convicted black man, a deportee, a gardener in a suit, thinking you belong." Desmond didn't blink. "I speak 10 languages, Miss Michelle. I've read treaties, trade pacts, and law books, but I still haven't found a word that captures the kind of fear that hides behind color prejudice and calls it professionalism." She scoffed, folding her arms with brittle pride. "You think being multilingual makes you special?" "No," Desmond said. "I think surviving the hell that a miscarriage of justice put me through and still choosing to build instead of destroy is what makes me special. The languages, they're just proof I was always more intelligent than the way prejudice tried to define me as a black man." Her lips parted, maybe to fire back, but nothing came. Her silence said more than any insult could. Then she turned and walked away, her heels echoing like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence she could no longer control. Carlton approached from behind, quiet but sure. "I heard the commotion," he said. "Let me save you the trouble of asking. Michelle's gone." Desmond didn't react immediately, his gaze lingering on the garden. "Someone lost their job because of my rise." Carlton shook his head gently. "You didn't cause anyone to lose their job. What I've come to realize is that many people were denied opportunities because of Michelle's bias, her preference for lighter-skinned individuals." Desmond finally turned to face him, eyes sharp. "So tell me, Mr. Stewart, what am I to you now?" Carlton met his gaze steadily. "Someone who made me understand the importance of treating everyone equally, with kindness and without judgment. Above all, you're someone I respect." They stood in silence, two men once separated by status, now meeting on equal ground. 3 weeks later, Desmond stood in the heart of Georgetown, Guyana, soaking in the vibrant rhythm of the city around him. Gone was the khaki gardener's uniform, replaced by a sharp suit. No one called him deportee anymore. Instead, eyes followed him with admiration, curiosity rather than contempt. The investors had entrusted him to lead research and communications across the Caribbean and South America. For the first time in years, Desmond could breathe freely, unburdened by the heavy weight of mere survival. His phone buzzed. A call from Carlton. "How are you?" Desmond hesitated, then replied, "Liberated. Now I realize I was imprisoned, mentally and physically, before I met you." Now, I feel truly free. How about you? Carlton's reply came almost instantly. Give thanks for life. I'm happy you found your wings. Keep soaring to greater heights. The next evening, the investors invited Desmond to dinner. Mr. Sato raised his glass and said in his native tongue, "You didn't just translate our language. You translated your integrity, and that is worth more than money." As Desmond raised the glass to his lips, he realized he was no longer just a translator. He was becoming a vital presence to the Japanese investors. He had once lived on the far edges of money and power. Now, he stood at the very center of it all. Gone were the days of his old bicycle, worn shoes, and gardener's uniform. Now, Desmond was chauffeured in luxury cars, flew on private jets, and his name appeared on policy documents spread across conference tables around the globe. Yet despite the dizzying heights he had reached, he remained grounded by one simple truth. He never forgot where he came from. This morning, instead of a sleek office or bustling boardroom, Desmond stood in a quiet yard where it all began. His grandmother's humble home. The house wasn't a mansion, but it was a foundation, solid, enduring, and full of love. His grandmother sat beneath the shade of a sprawling East Indian mango tree, watching him quietly, a faint smile playing on her lips. With steady hands, Desmond cleared the garden, preparing the soil to sow seeds. Seeds that would grow into something new, something hopeful. The warm earth beneath his fingers was a reminder that no matter how far he soared, his roots remained strong. "I never thought I'd be here like this," he said softly, glancing at his grandmother. She reached out, gently touching his hand. "You've come far, my grandson, but you always had it in you. I just waited for the world to see it too." Desmond nodded, feeling the weight of her words and the quiet pride in her eyes. The journey had been long and full of obstacles. Racism, wrongful imprisonment, exile. But each challenge had shaped him into the man he was today. A man who refused to be defined by the mistakes others made about him, or the judgments they cast. As he looked up at the blue sky, a cool breeze carried the scent of burning wood and earth from a nearby coal kiln. Desmond felt a profound sense of freedom. Freedom not only from the chains of his past, but from the limitations others tried to impose on him. The phone in his pocket buzzed softly. A message from Carlton. "Keep growing. The world is your oyster." Desmond smiled, pocketing the phone. He knelt slowly, pressing a seed into the soil with the same hands that once gripped prison bars. In that moment, Desmond was no longer just a gardener or a translator. He was both the seed and the soil of a new beginning. Maybe the world didn't need another translator, just someone to remind us what dignity looks like. Sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one person believing in you to change everything. For Desmond, that moment had blossomed into a lifetime of possibility. And now, at last, he was ready to soar. True strength lies not in where you start, but in the courage to rise above judgment and adversity. When we treat others with respect and believe in their potential, we unlock possibilities that can change lives and even transform the world. If you enjoyed the story, show some love. Like, comment, and subscribe to Word, Sound, and Story, where Troy McKenzie transforms real-life experiences into meaningful, dramatic, and entertaining tales. Thanks for watching. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Bless up.